Hi everyone, so as some of you may know, I've recently reached 8 years of making content on YouTube. Okay, maybe not recently. I got busy, I'm really sorry. Technically, I made my channel on the 17th of April 2014, so by extension that is my channel anniversary. But I posted my first video on the 30th of July 2015, and my first Warioware DIY cover is on the 11th of August 2015. So I count July 2015 as my starting point. I am a bit late celebrating though. I have no valid reason, I was playing Xenoblade Chronicles 3. But to celebrate belatedly, I decided to do a little Q&A video. I asked people on the YouTube community tab and on Twitter for questions. Unless it's a weird or really invasive question, I'll be answering all the questions I've gotten. So without further ado, let's get into it. Speaking of Xenoblade Chronicles 3, my first question comes from Paperspock on the YouTube community tab, who asked, what songs from Xenoblade Chronicles 3 are your favourite so far? One of my favourites so far has to be the Kevis Colony Day music. Without going into spoiler territory, it really gives off the we're free but now what feeling. I even did a Mario Paint cover of that one. You can find it linked in the description below. I also really like You Will Know Our Names finale. I remember hearing the regular monster theme, wondering how they could top that, then listening to the event monster music. My only complaint with the music is that the chain attack theme disrupts it. The chain attack music is amazing too though. Our second question is focused more on Warioware DIY and comes from, oh god, I'm gonna really struggle to pronounce this, so I'm just gonna say it, NSPGYT, who asks, when did you start making covers in Warioware DIY? So I've owned the game since around May or June of 2010, but just made random stuff for the longest time until I studied music theory in high school, starting around 2014. I remembered that Warioware DIY existed and had a kinda aha moment when I realised I could make real music in it using my sheet music reading knowledge. That's when I started creating video game covers in DIY, then I started uploading them in 2015. Weird how the strangest things somehow lead to the coolest outcomes. The next question comes from Video Dojo, who asks, if you could add one instrument or sound to Warioware DIY's music maker, what would it be? Very good question, but I can't just choose one. I do wish Warioware DIY had a harp of some kind, like how Mario Paint Composer does in the form of a boo. The green shell does the job in a pinch, but an actual harp would be lovely. I also think we need more woodwind instruments. Nothing worse than finding a cool song that requires either an oboe or a clarinet, then having to choose a completely different instrument like the saxophone or something. There really isn't much that's even similar to a woodwind instrument in DIY. Also, not a new instrument per se, but I wish we had a better pan flute. The one we have has this weird delay to it and it drives me crazy. I wish they just used the pan flute sample from Spirit Tracks, that one is beautiful. Moving on to the only question from Twitter, Rebateman asks, what was the first DIY cover you planned to release but scrapped or cancelled, or didn't release? It was so long ago, I'm struggling to remember. The earliest one I could think of was a really old cover of Your Best Friend from Undertale that I made in 2015. Since it was made around the same time as my cover of Once Upon a Time, my original intention was to make as much of the OST as possible. Looking back, it was a really silly idea to try and do the whole Undertale OST on my own. It's the type of thing that would require a team effort, if you know what I mean. Back to the YouTube community tab, GameBoy64 asks, what would you say to a beginner just starting out on Warioware DIY? The advice I'm about to give will mostly sound cheesy, but it's all true from my personal experience. First off, start creating now, even if you feel like your covers aren't to the standard you want, because as harsh as this will sound, you won't make it to that standard if you don't start. Even if you just start with a 10-second jingle or a really simple song, you can continue to grow from there. Also, don't be afraid to use sheet music or MIDIs to guide you. Just make sure to check where you're getting them from. Nin Sheet Music and Moose Score are both amazing ones I use frequently for this purpose. Next, don't be afraid to ask others for help. Sometimes the answer you're looking for is on the tip of your tongue and all you needed was that small push to get the solution. Plus, asking for help is a great skill to have when creating anything. I'm a hypocrite when it comes to this because I'm really awkward about asking for help, but trust me, you'll want to ask for help when it comes to things. The Warioware DIY community has a lot of amazing people who are willing to help and give advice. I'll link the Discord server in the description below, like I do with most of my videos. Lastly, I cannot stress this enough. If someone else has already done a cover of a song you wanted to do, don't feel discouraged from doing the same song yourself. the world would be really boring if it was only one DIY cover of every song that existed. Plus, it's really fun hearing different takes on the songs. This one is actually a minor pet peeve of mine. I sometimes make a cover of a song, then someone will comment on it saying something like, "Aw, I wanted to do that one," or something. As long as there's no copying or foul play, do whatever songs you like, no matter who else did it. This next question comes from Super Leo, who asks, while making multiple covers through these years, when deciding to make a cover, would you rather go for Warioware DIY, Mario Paint Composer, or something else for a concept or idea? This is a really difficult question to give a short answer to, but whichever game or software I choose to make a specific song really depends on not only the song itself, but other deciding factors like what the song needs and how confident I am in making that song in each of the programs. Choosing a song could be something as simple as, I need a harp, I'm going to create the song in Mario Paint, or I'm more confident in doing the percussion for this song in WarioWare DIY, so I'll make it in that. Or even something like, my Mario Paint backlog is getting long, I'm going to make it in DIY instead. But it could also be something like my mood, skills, or confidence in the programs. Sometimes I just choose one, the other, or even both just because I want to. Another thing to consider is that I'm not as confident or skilled in Mario Paint compared to WarioWare DIY, due to spending 8 years in DIY compared to almost 3 in Mario Paint. But Super Mario Paint has less limits than DIY, so it's a coin toss on whether I choose to do a more complicated song in WarioWare DIY or Mario Paint. That, and I'm sometimes too lazy to layer DIY covers on top of each other, so Mario Paint earned a point on that front. The only thing that stays mostly consistent is how I handle songs with a swing tempo. I almost always pick WarioWare DIY for these because there's a button in the game that does it for me. Plus, figuring out swing songs by hand is a pain in Mario Paint. I'll get around to learning it eventually, but for now I'm just gonna stick to DIY with its swing button. The last WarioWare DIY related question comes from Xavier, who asks, do you think you'll see yourself upgrading from WarioWare DIY or Mario Paint to something more complex like FL Studios or something like that in the future? Well, technically I already have. Back in 2020 up until around the year 2022, I was making more mainstream video game song covers. A lot of them aged like milk, but I've been playing a few of them throughout this video. I'll also link the playlists to them in the description below. I never really stuck to doing this though, I enjoy it, but I prefer making music with the wacky limits. Plus, beyond visualizing MIDIs in an easy to read way for me, LMMS is terrible and I don't have the time to relearn new software that is both free and very similar to LMMS. If you have suggestions, I'd love to hear them. I've tried Cakewalk and I couldn't grasp it, but maybe there's other stuff out there that might help. This next question comes from Red Toady, who simply asked how I decided on my username. This is a long answer, so I'm just going to read out the response I gave on Gaming Reinvented when I answered the question there. If you want to learn more about me and hear my answers to any questions that weren't asked here, I highly recommend reading that interview. I'll link it below. The interview is from almost a year ago, but not too much has changed since I was interviewed. To answer the actual question though, Squishy was always a childhood nickname of mine that kinda just stuck, especially since I have a very awkward pronunciation and spelling of my first name. With that in mind, almost everyone in my life calls me Squishy, even in person. The only people that don't are actually teachers. As for the Pixelz part, that's more complicated and has a story attached to it. So back in 2014, a YouTuber I used to watch had a Tomodachi Life series, and they were accepting me's from some of their fans. I wanted to submit my me, but wasn't comfortable sharing my surname online, so I just made it Pixelz and it stuck outside of that. Then how I acquired the Z in Pixelz is quite simple. When I chose the username Squishy Pixelz, I discovered that a company existed with that exact name. I was too attached to the username at that point, so I just replaced the second S with a Z, thus Squishy Pixelz was born. It's a good thing too, although I don't think the Squishy Pixelz company exists anymore. There's actually a Minecraft texture pack called Squishy Pixelz with an S, so the Z is still mine. This last question comes from Animated Prince, who asks, what are some games you have memories of on the DS? Do you play Flipnote Studio? Oh, I could go on about DS games from my childhood for ages. Besides the WarioWare games, I really enjoyed playing the Mario and Luigi games, and they were a huge inspiration for a lot of my covers I create. Yoko Shiromura is amazing. Other popular DS games I loved include Super Mario 64 DS, New Super Mario Bros., Animal Crossing Wild World, and the various Harvest Moon games. I have a lot of nostalgia for Harvest Moon in particular. Honourable mention goes to both Super Princess Peach and the first Drawn to Life game. I remember loving both of those games in particular, and they don't really get the love they deserve. I'm actually replaying Drawn to Life alongside playing Sea of Stars. And that was the Q&A video. Thank you to everyone who asked me some questions. I'd love to make this a yearly thing, I really enjoyed it. And I don't say this often on the channel, but feel free to subscribe for more WarioWare DIY and Mario Paint covers. Until next time, bye!